Achillea millefolium. Nickname for this plant is Yarrow. This is part 1, and in part 2, I'll be sharing a mnemonic or memory technique to help you commit to memory the most distinguishing characteristics of this plant and its edible parts. So be sure to watch all of part 1 so that part 2 is understandable. The flowers of the yarrow plant are typically white, but they can bear shades of yellow, pink, or purple. Stems are erect. They're not hollow. You'll find them with 1 to several stems per plant. This is where the plant derives its nickname from, for these appear to be arrow shafts. In the mnemonic, you will be imagining using the arrow that you've made yourself to secure survival food. The arrow will need to be solid and not hollow, or I should say the arrow shaft, that is. You would want to make sure you do not have a hollow arrow shaft by seeing where the leaves meet the stem. Where you see the leaves meet the stem, you have nodes or joints. Cut in between these joints to see if whether or not the stem is hollow. If you have a straw, you do not have an arrow. The size is from 1 to 2 feet wide by 2 to 3 feet tall. Now the width applies to how they're interconnected underground, whereas you might see from 1 to 8 or 9 stems coming from out of the ground. They appear to be separate flowers when in fact underground they are interconnected by a rhizomous root system, which I will explain later. And it's this rhizomous root system which makes their width that much greater. The leaves are feather-like in appearance, and they have a lance-shaped outline like the tip of a spear. The tip of the spear should remind you that this plant is associated with an arrow, and also in the mnemonic we'll be using the feather or the feather-like leaves as fletching to our arrow on the bottom, which helps stabilize the arrow in flight and allows it to spin. The dimension of these leaves are from 1/4 to 1.5 inches wide by 1 to 6 inches long. We're looking at compound leaves. This is a leaf, while what grows out of the leaf stalk are referred to as leaflets. These leaflets bear round stalks. They're thread-like, thin, and as you can see, they populate the leaf stalk very sparsely. There's lots of air, lots of space between the leaflets there. If you were to look down upon this leaf, you will notice that it holds something of a round shape by circumference. Now, I mention those characteristics because one of its species, a similar species, being known as Western Yarrow, it's very difficult to distinguish the two plants. And the distinction is only necessary if you will be using, or if you plan to use, the Yarrow plant for edible purposes. Whereas I was not able to find any information concerning the edibility of Western Yarrow. As far as the medicinal uses of both yarrows are concerned, they can be used identically. So there is no need to make the distinction between the two plants if they are being used for medicinal purposes. But again, for edibility, there are two ways that the two plants, the two yarrows, can be distinguished. The Western Yarrow leaves are not lance-shaped like this. The leaflets populate the leaf stalk in a much more dense fashion, not as much air, not as much space in between, not as many gaps. The Western Yarrow leaves appear to be more bristly. They also botany references refer to Western Yarrow leaves as being fern-like or lacy, which means that they're more flat. Whereas again, the leaflets of the yarrow plant are more round, thin, thread-like. The smallest distinction concerning the leaves, the largest distinction concerning the shape of their flower clusters, which we'll get to later. Now, the smallest distinction concerning the leaves can be seen in its leaflets. Each leaflet, for this explanation, I will say each leaflet has leaflets. Let me jump up here. This one stands out a little bit more. This leaflet has leaflets. Now the leaflets of the yarrow plant share the same plane as the leaflet stalk, which means that if you were to look down upon this leaflet, there will be one leaflet to the right and another leaflet to the left, as you would be looking down upon a candle lever. You have one candle here, a candle there, and a candle there. It forms a straight line. They share the same plane. Whereas with Western Yarrow, and I'll get to a picture of those leaves later, the leaflets ascend or descend depending on which angle you're looking at it from. Whereas again, if you were to look down upon the leaflet here, it would form a V shape. This is another picture of an arrow plant leaf. Notice how the leaflets are evenly distributed along the leaf stalk. The stalks are round, very thin, thread-like, sparse, airy, wispy, soft. It's another good example of those characteristics. If you were to crush this leaf, it will emit a very strong, sweet scent. This is a picture of Western Yarrow leaves, several of them in this picture. The best example of what I was explaining earlier is here on this leaf. You look at this top leaflet, you will see the leaflet stalk represents the ridge of a house or the ridge of a mountain, while the leaflets descend in this case, forming the mountain or forming the roof of the house. You were to look down upon this leaflet in this direction, you will see what forms a U shape, or a V shape, I should say, V shape. Here's another good example. You see the leaflet stalk here, while the leaflets are ascending, like a canoe. Whereas with the arrow plant leaves and leaflets, these leaflets will lie on the same plane or cross from the leaflet stalk. Individual flowers have 3 to 8 ray flowers or petals, typically just 5, surrounding a central disc. The flowers will also emit a very strong sweet scent when they're crushed. Many flowers form a single round by circumference, flat-topped flower cluster, which is often confused as a single flower. Arrow plant flower clusters, round in circumference, flat-topped, Western Yarrow flower clusters are round-topped. You may have heard in botany, or may hear in the future, how hemlock flower clusters are round shaped. But I will show you pictures in a later slide of how hemlock flower clusters can be flat. So as far as flower cluster shapes are concerned, I would only utilize that as being an identifier or a means to distinguish one plant from another as it pertains to just the yarrows. If you're having difficulty or just want to verify what you find in the yarrow leaves, refer to the flower cluster shapes for help or for validation. Flat topped, rounded circumference. This is an arrow plant. In this slide, I'd like for you to notice how the stems stagger on those stems. Flower cluster stems stagger off of the main stem. Individual or single flower stems stagger off of the cluster stems, or peduncles if you watched the previous video. An arrow plant, flat topped. Notice the staggering stems. In this picture, I'd like for you to notice how the leaves are of an alternating format, not opposite. Jump back to this slide here. Forgot to mention something or distinguish something. I was talking about how these stems stagger, whereas the poisonous hemlocks and other lookalikes will appear with the stems radiating from a single point. I'll be showing you detailed pictures of this in later slides, but in case there was any confusion as to what staggering meant, it is made, that term is made in reference to how it can be distinguished from stems which radiate from the same point, like spokes in a wheel or an umbrella, as the hemlocks do. Again, staggering stems. The flowers of this arrow plant are pink, flat topped. This is a picture of hemlock leaves. It's much easier to distinguish hemlock from either yarrows is by its leaves, its stems, and its root system. The leaves that you see here look nothing alike. The stems of the hemlocks are hollow, and the roots are not rhizomatous, which we will get to here in a later slide. This picture shows us round top clusters of yarrow, which indicates this as being a western yarrow plant. Validation can be found in its leaves. This is the picture I was telling you about concerning the poisonous hemlock, which bears flat-topped flower clusters. Yarrow plant, staggering stems, flat-topped. The leaves of the yarrow plant are larger toward the bottom and smaller toward the top. The smaller leaves are youngest, more succulent, and are best for edibility purposes. Hemlocks. This hemlock, as you see, the single flowers are born from out of a central point. Yarrow plant. Hemlock. Yarrow plant. Hemlock. The yarrow plant has what I was saying earlier, a rhizomous root system which crawls along the ground. I'll be using the word crawl in the mnemonic, tying it in with the plant as a memory technique. These represent the stems, and these fibrous pieces here you see represent the roots. Now additional plants grow from out of these stems underground, which makes multiple plants interconnected. This is another example of the yarrow plant. How above the ground each of these plants might appear to be separate, when in fact underground they are interconnected by this rhizome or rhizomous root system. Stems, and the roots. As these grow and develop, more plants, stocks will develop as well. This is a taproot, which is known to be that of the poison hemlock. The water hemlock have tuberous roots. Neither this one or the prior slide or previous slide are rhizomous. The edible parts of the yarrow plant are the young flowers or the young leaves near the top of the plant and the flowers. Eat the flowers sparingly. Some sources suggest using the flowers as a salad additive or added as flavoring along with other wild edibles, just to spice it up a little. This is the end of part 1, and in part 2 I'll be sharing the memory technique to help you commit to memory the most distinguishing characteristics of this plant and its edible parts. To learn how to prepare these parts, go to survivalplantsmemorycourse.com and click on Achillea millefolium through the Index of Plants link and read the methods of preparation section. Thank you for watching.